What if I told you there's a place in Tennessee, hidden under the shadow of old trees and thick mist, where the land itself seems cursed? A farm where terrified screams echoed across the fields and people vanished without explanation. What if I told you this isn't just another ghost story, but a real-life nightmare that wormed its way into the darkest recesses of American folklore? The Bell Witch haunting is not just a haunting, it's a vendetta with roots that dig deep into a family's sins and secrets. But here's the twist. The Bell Witch wasn't tormenting the bells by chance. She had a purpose, a dark, relentless drive for vengeance that even time itself couldn't bury. The Bell Witch didn't just haunt the bells. She was after blood, claiming what was owed to her, and she won't stop until her revenge is complete. Let me tell you this tale, not from the outside, but from someone who's been closer to this horror than anyone could imagine. Chapter 1. The Farm That Screamed. The story began in 1817, on a quiet farm in Robertson County, Tennessee, at the edge of the American frontier. The Bell family was typical for the time, religious, hard-working, and determined to carve out a life from the unforgiving land. In this era, beliefs in witchcraft, curses, and the supernatural were both feared and taboo, remnants of older traditions the settlers carried with them. But the Bell farm, with its isolation and dark, whispering woods, soon became a breeding ground for terror. At first, the disturbances were subtle, almost dismissible. Small thuds in the middle of the night, the floorboards creaking under what seemed to be invisible steps. One evening, young Betsy was reading by candlelight when she heard the distinct sound of breathing, slow, labored, almost as if it were pressed close to her ear. Her heart pounded, her pulse thick in her throat, but when she turned, there was nothing. Then doors began to creak open on their own, slowly, painfully, the wooden hinges groaning like a sigh of dread. Betsy's father, John Bell, dismissed it as drafts, the natural settling of an old house. But soon the noises grew louder, heavy footsteps above them, moving through the rooms one by one, as if searching, stopping just above Betsy's room. One night, as Betsy lay in bed, her eyes adjusting to the flickering shadows cast by the candle's glow, she heard something that turned her blood to ice. Soft, scratchy fingernails scraping across her bedroom door, a slow, relentless scratch, like something clawing to get in. Her heart pounded as she lay paralyzed, waiting for the sound to stop. But it didn't. It grew louder, closer, until finally she heard the faintest whisper through the door. Betsy. That was when she knew. This wasn't just a haunted house. Something here was alive, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. And the bells were trapped with it. It wasn't long before the sounds evolved into voices. Betsy heard her name whispered in the darkness, calling to her in a voice that seemed to change from a woman's soft tone to a childlike giggle. Then one night she saw it, something shadowy with piercing eyes, lurking in the corner of her room. From that night, the Bell family was never the same. Chapter 2. The Witch's Curse. As weeks turned to months, the Bell family's haunting worsened, each night seemingly darker, more suffocating than the last. Word of their torment spread through Robertson County, and the townsfolk whispered one name with fearful certainty: Kate Batts. Kate had been an outcast, a widow known for her peculiar habits and sharp tongue, often seen brewing potions in the moonlight and whispering incantations that sent shivers through the townsfolk. Some claimed she practiced dark magic, while others whispered that she had descended into madness following her husband's mysterious death. She'd been known to quarrel with John Bell over a disputed land deal, and her last words to him, "If I die, I'll haunt you," were spoken with a bitter, venomous conviction. The Bell family, and indeed the whole town, knew that Kate had died harboring a hatred so deep that not even death would free her from her grudge. They now believed she had come back, vengeful and powerful, a spirit who could speak, touch, and torment, and she seemed determined to make the Bells suffer. It started innocently enough with the ghostly whisper of a hymn in the still of the night, just barely audible over the crackling fire. But soon the hymns became louder, dissonant, mocking, and accompanied by the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing in empty rooms. The witch would sing in a sweet, lilting tone, only to suddenly drop to a voice that was low, guttural, inhuman. Some nights, Betsy would lie in bed and hear the voice right next to her ear. "Are you afraid?" it would ask. with a voice that dripped with malicious delight. As her fear grew, so did the witch's aggression. Betsy would awaken to find herself pinned down, an icy pressure on her chest, her breath shallow as the weight bore down on her. She felt as if cold hands were wrapped around her neck, squeezing, choking. In the morning, bruises would bloom around her throat in the shape of fingers. The witch did not spare the rest of the family either.
The Bells would hear furniture dragging across the floor above them, only to find everything in its place when they went to check.
Doors would slam on their own with a violence that shook the house, as though the spirit was in a furious rage.
Occasionally, the witch's voice would erupt in laughter, low and menacing, echoing down the halls and filling the rooms with a chill that no fire could chase away.
One evening, as the family sat around the dinner table, the witch's voice joined them.
This time, she spoke clearly, addressing John with chilling malice. "You can't run from what you've done," she said, her voice crackling through the silence like a flame catching dry wood.
John, who had always kept a stoic front, paled and looked down, unable to meet his family's questioning gaze.
For a moment, the whole house held its breath and the air seemed to thicken, pressing in from all sides.
The witch had made her intentions clear. She wasn't just here to haunt them. She was here to expose their secrets and to punish. The Bells tried everything to rid themselves of the witch.
They brought in preachers who read scripture and sprinkled holy water around the house.
But the witch only mocked them, reciting passages from the Bible with a mocking tone, twisting the words until they sounded like curses.
On one occasion, a preacher stood before the family, reading aloud, and as he did, the witch let out a blood-curdling scream that seemed to come from the walls themselves, rattling every window.
The preacher dropped his Bible, backing away as the pages fluttered open, each one blank as though the ink had been drained from the book. One night, John himself confronted the voice, his anger overcoming his fear.
"Why are you here?"
he demanded, his voice shaking. The witch's response was immediate, whispered from every corner, yet somehow deafening.
"I'm here for what you owe."
The chill of her words froze him in place, and in the silence that followed, he realized that whatever she was after, it was something only he could give. It was then that John began to realize the witch wasn't just here to scare them. She was here to exact a punishment, one that wouldn't end with simple screams or cold hands in the night. As the nights grew darker and the witch's presence more sinister, a mysterious stranger arrived in Robertson County. His clothes were dark and worn, his face hidden beneath the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. He carried no luggage, no horse, just a leather-bound journal tucked beneath his arm, thick with strange symbols and drawings. He knocked on the Bell family's door, his eyes piercing through the gloom, and introduced himself as someone who studied the dark things.
When John Bell led him into the dim parlor, the stranger seemed to inspect every corner of the room, as if he could see things hidden from the Bell family's sight. His gaze lingered over Betsy, his face twisted into a frown, as though he sensed the fear that clung to her.
"The witch has a reason for being here. She doesn't haunt without cause."
"What reason?"
John demanded, his voice cracking under the strain. The stranger's eyes locked onto his, and for a moment John felt something probing, prying, as if this man could see into his very soul.
"Some secrets should stay buried, but the soil here is restless. She's after blood, John, and she won't stop until she gets it."
The family shivered, each of them feeling the weight of those words settling around them, an invisible shroud of doom. That night, as the stranger sat by the fire, John couldn't shake the feeling that the witch's eyes were watching them both, gleaming from somewhere deep within the shadows. As the haunting grew more brutal, John Bell could no longer deny the truth lurking in his past, a dark secret buried, quite literally, beneath the ground he now walked. Years ago, in the midst of a bitter land dispute, John had struck down a man who dared challenge him. But it wasn't just any rival. This man, whose name was lost to time but whose blood still seemed to stain the soil, had been a friend of Kate Batts. a confidant who had fought for her family's rights and who believed John had swindled her in the land deal. John remembered it too well. In a fit of rage, he'd taken his enemy's life, silencing his screams with a rock to the head. He'd buried him in a shallow grave beneath an old, gnarled tree, and for years, he believed the past had been put to rest. But Kate had never stopped searching for answers after her friend went missing, convinced that John Bell was to blame. It was this fury that had led her to curse the Bell family on her deathbed, vowing that her spirit would not rest until vengeance was served. The stranger, it turned out, was tied to this bloody history in ways John hadn't expected. He was a distant relative of the man John had killed and a distant cousin of Kate Batts, bound to her by blood and by the ancient promise of retribution. The stranger's purpose was more than a simple warning. He had come as an extension of Kate's curse, her blood-bound kin who would ensure that her wrath was fully realized. The stranger looked at John with something dark and sorrowful, almost as though he were a reluctant participant in this haunting. "You thought you could bury the past," he whispered, his voice like the crackle of dead leaves in a cold wind. "But blood remembers, and Kate's vengeance reaches beyond the grave." As the stranger's words sank in, John began to hear whispers echoing around him, voices from the trees, calling out for justice. The very ground beneath his feet seemed to shudder, rejecting the body he'd buried, refusing to keep his secret hidden any longer. As John's health declined, he became convinced the witch was poisoning him. His skin grew pale, his body weak. The family watched as he wasted away, terrified and helpless. On his deathbed, John tried to confess his guilt to his wife, but his voice was faint, and the witch's laughter drowned him out. The air in the Bell household grew thick with dread as the witch's revenge unfolded like a grotesque play, each act more harrowing than the last. With John Bell dead, Kate Batts unleashed her fury upon the remaining family members with a vengeance that left no room for mercy. The spirit that had tormented John was now free to turn her wrath on those he had loved. It began with young Betsy, who found herself at the center of Kate's sinister focus. Each night, as she lay trembling beneath her covers, the whisper of the witch seeped through the cracks in the walls. "You think you can escape me?" it would hiss, laced with venom. The air in the room grew cold, shadows twisted into ghastly shapes that danced in the flickering candlelight. Betsy would wake with screams caught in her throat, finding deep, purple bruises on her arms, marks left by an unseen force that left her thrashing helplessly. The witch's presence loomed large, making her feel as though she were being watched, every movement scrutinized by the spirit of vengeance. Lucy, John's wife, began to experience vivid nightmares filled with images of her husband's treachery, waking in a cold sweat, convinced that Kate's ghostly figure was looming over her, judging her for her husband's sins. Each night, Lucy's spirit dimmed further, her vitality draining as despair took root in her heart. The echoes of Kate's laughter filled the house, a reminder of the vengeance that coursed through the air. Even the farm itself seemed to turn against them, with the creaking floorboards sounding like the whispering accusations of the dead. Objects would shift from their places, and the scent of decay would fill the air, suffocating the family in a miasma of dread. The whispers would grow into screams, the very walls seemingly alive with Kate's fury. "Your family will suffer because of you," the voice echoed, a chilling proclamation that drove Lucy deeper into madness. The townspeople, drawn by tales of the witch's curse, began to gather outside the Bell home. Curiosity turned to fear as they witnessed the terror unfolding within. Some came with crosses and prayers, hoping to cleanse the house of its malevolent spirit, but Kate only reveled in their failure. She thrived on the chaos she created, a puppeteer pulling the strings of despair and fear. The stranger, still lingering in the shadows, observed the family's unraveling. He was a reluctant witness to the witch's wrath, feeling the weight of the blood debt as it grew heavier. Some debts can only be repaid in blood, he had warned John, and now those words echoed ominously in Lucy's mind. Each passing day saw the Bell family descend further into torment. Betsy was tormented not only by the witch's wrath, but also by the growing suspicion that her mother, Lucy, was losing her grip on reality. The family fractured, unity dissolving in the face of unrelenting supernatural horror. With John gone, it became clear that the witch's revenge was not merely a haunting, but a full-blown siege against everything the Bells held dear. As the family spiraled into despair, one thing became undeniable. Kate Batts had returned, and she was ready to claim her vengeance, one soul at a time. Years later, after the Bell family had moved on and the farm had passed to strangers, people continued to report strange occurrences: lights flickering at night, shadows in empty fields, faint voices on the wind. Some claimed they could hear the witch's laughter still, echoing through the woods. One evening, an old man came to the farm, walking slowly with a cane, his figure just a shadow against the setting sun. He walked to a spot in the field where the earth seemed unnaturally disturbed, and paused. In the silence, he muttered to himself, as if in conversation with the air, "I'm sorry, I know what I did, but it was all for family." The man turned and looked at the farmhouse, a haunted look in his eyes. Hit that subscribe button if you embrace your inner witch and want to conjure up some spine-tingling tales. If you're just here for the ghost stories, you might want to run. Those broomsticks can be pretty sharp. And don't forget to follow me or check the link in the description for the most amazing Facebook witch community group, the Magical Mystical Witches Group. The narrator was me, the grandson of John Bell's brother. I knew the truth my family had tried to bury, that John Bell's killing wasn't just a land dispute. He had killed a man who had wronged the Bell family, in revenge for something dark, something we never spoke of. My family had kept this secret, hiding it from the world. We thought we had escaped it, but the curse was ours to carry. It runs in our blood. I came to that farm that day because I knew deep down that the witch wasn't done. She still had unfinished business, and she's still waiting for one of us to finally pay the price.